Hey, now it's the Rob from 106.1 KISS FM here with my 16-bit colleague.
Hey guys, it's me, Steve, web contributor to 1061evansville.com. And like an NES cartridge, if you blow on our backsides, we're more likely to work.
Absolutely right. That's the best one of those that you've done, I think, so far, Steve. I forgot to wear a video game shirt today.
Oh, that's okay.
I apologize. It slipped my mind. But I am ready to talk about, like you mentioned, those little gray cartridges that you have to blow into work.
Yes.
The NES. And we're going to start a series of videos where we're going to focus exclusively on a console, and we're going to talk about games that are exclusively on that console that are the best among that console. And we're starting pretty much with the beginning. I mean, you can date consoles back further than the NES, but I think that that's the one that people consider the launching point of the modern video game era here in the United States. So Steve and I have both selected 3 video games that we feel are the best representation of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Games you won't find on any other consoles. So Steve, would you like to get things started? What do you feel is the third best NES game?
In my humble opinion, the third best NES game is Ninja Gaiden.
A great choice. I feel like it's got to be on my list somewhere, if you give me a second. I have my top 25 written down here, but explain Ninja Gaiden, Steve. Induct it, so to speak.
It's basically a side-scrolling beat-em-up. You're a little ninja. You kind of flip through level to level. You fight bosses. It was an all-around good game. I really felt like I was in there fighting. Just a great example of a Nintendo game.
There's always been different ways people pronounce that game,
Yes.
whether it's Ninja Gaiden, Ninja Gaiden.
Yes.
A few things about Ninja, I'll say Gaiden. I don't even know what the right way to say is. That was a very fun game.
Yes.
Of all the 3 main ones on the NES, or I believe there were only 3, insanely difficult games.
Yes.
They would start out at a very good pace, what I considered a good pace, and then they would get painstakingly difficult later on as the game would progress. And also, one of my favorite things about Ninja Gaiden, whatever his name is, it is credited with inventing the cutscene in video games.
Okay.
As being the first game to really have cutscenes, where when you would beat a level, it would show you a little bit of a movie,
Okay,
and then
yeah.
you would play the next level.
Yes.
That was credited as being one of Ninja Gaiden's influences on video games. A great choice, Steve.
Okay.
Very, very good. The third game I'm going to talk about, or my number 3 selected game, is Super Mario Bros. 3. A lot of people put this game at the top of their list, and it certainly belongs there. I've read a lot of articles about top 20 video games this, top 100 NES games that. Super Mario 3 gets its love,
Yes.
and deservedly so. This is a game that built upon one of the most successful engines of all times, the original Super Mario Brothers. Made it so much bigger, so much better. It added a personality with power-ups. The levels each had a distinct feel about them, which was so important. By the time Mario 3 came out, Super Mario was becoming kind of a legend, where he was just a newcomer in 1985. By the time 1990 rolled around, he was the dude. He was in cartoons. He was in movies like The Wizard, which essentially was a huge movie to promote this crazy game. Everything changed when Mario powered up to Super Mario 3.
Yes.
Do you have thoughts on that one?
Definitely one of my favorite Mario games of all time.
I was even playing that game up until last week. Last weekend I was playing it with my girlfriend on my Retron 5. Having a great time. So, congratulations, Super Mario 3. You are among the best of your field.
Yes.
So, all right, Steve, number 2.
My number 2 is actually a number 2, Double Dragon 2.
I was figuring Double Dragon, and I have a guess as to what your number 1 is. No, I won't say it. So your number 2 is Double Dragon 2.
Yeah. Apparently I like side-scrolling beat-em-ups. Where Double Dragon differs, they kind of added a 3D element to where not only could you side-scroll, but kind of go up and back. It was the first double cooperative game where you could play with a friend.
Yeah.
Billy and Jimmy got their names.
Billy and Jimmy Lee, right?
Yes. It's like they had the test one and the first one. They were named Spike and Hammer. The Double Dragon 2 was really the first game where they got it right, so that's my number 2 on the list.
All right, Double Dragon 2. Number 2 on my list, I feel maybe kind of cheating. I'll explain why. My second favorite Nintendo game is called Maniac Mansion.
Okay, yeah.
We've talked about that before. Now, while it wasn't on any other video game consoles, it is probably best regarded as a PC game, a computer game, but I'm going to go ahead and induct it. And if for some reason you don't accept Maniac Mansion as a game, as an exclusive game to the Nintendo, go ahead and insert The Legend of Zelda in there, which was my first runner-up anyway, followed by Metroid. That rounds out my top 5. But Maniac Mansion is a game that changed the way that I looked at games. And I also think that it changed the way that video game stories were told.
Yeah.
I love that is the definitive adventure game to me, the Maniac Mansion franchise. You can look at the first one or the second one, Day of the Tentacle, where you kind of live out the story. You solve inane puzzles. It's very humor-driven. It's very story-driven. And that was the first game of that nature that I had ever played.
Yeah.
And it changed the way that I play games because it put the story and it put the puzzles in the forefront. But not only, it wasn't like typical story game typical video game puzzles.
Yeah.
It was done in a very different way, a very humorous way that only the people behind that game could do. And now those guys, at least Ron Gilbert, who had a big part of the story, and Tim Schafer, they still continue to make video games, but they still do it in that same style because it's always worked for them and it's always worked for me. A cult classic, my second favorite Nintendo game is Maniac Mansion.
All right.
Even better than Legend of Zelda. Better than
Oh, wow.
Metroid. Games I adore. Those are 4 and 5 for me. Maniac Mansion number 2. So, Steve, in your opinion, what is the best video game on the Nintendo Entertainment System?
Well, I don't know if you had made mention you thought you knew where I was going. I don't know if I'm throwing you a curveball here, but I'm going with the first game, the pack-in game, Super
Really?
Mario Brothers.
That was not what I was expecting.
What were you expecting?
I was expecting you to say Contra.
Oh, I love Contra, but I mean, again, side-scrolling
Sure.
game, that's probably in my 4th or 5th space.
Yeah.
But Super Mario Brothers, again, side-scrolling.
I have the first Mario Brothers at number 9. I
Okay.
love that game.
I do love that game. I can still play it today. The graphics don't hold up, but it doesn't matter. It's Mario. You know what you're doing. It's just a fun game.
I know you don't have a Wii U, but have you seen the press for Mario Maker?
I've heard just a little bit about it.
It seems like a really cool game, and not only can you build Mario levels, which is a cool mechanic. I don't know how much I'll get into that, but you can, with the push of a button, you can make it look like Super Mario Brothers 1, and it'll play and feel like that. And then another push of a button, it'll play like Mario 3.
Oh, wow.
And then one will make it look like Super Mario World for Super Nintendo.
Okay.
And then the last one will make it look like the modern Wii U version of Mario games. With the push of a button, you can do that. I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
That is the game that started it all. It was a first-class inductee, a first-ballot Hall of Famer for not only our Hall of Fame, the 16-bit Superstars Hall of Fame, but for the World Video Game Hall of Fame that we've talked about many times in Rochester. It certainly is a great representation of what the Nintendo was capable of.
Yeah.
My number 1 choice is also kind of a cult classic, but did get a lot of, I mean, you'll probably recognize the name, and there were definitely commercials. It landed the cover of Nintendo Power once, I remember. It was a late in the console lifespan, I want to say 92-ish.
Okay.
Star Tropics is the name of the game.
Huh.
Have you ever heard of it?
I've never even heard of it.
Well, it's like I said, it was big back in the day. It did have a sequel, but this game was, to me, the greatest combination of like storytelling and adventure style gaming. Very difficult to compare it to something else. The overworlds would kind of resemble something like a Final Fantasy, but there are no other similarities to that, to a role-playing game besides that. You would just walk from town to town, and you'd help people solve these problems, and then you'd go into a dungeon like Zelda, where you'd have to kind of walk around. You had a yo-yo as your initial weapon, so it was very kid-friendly, and you had to save your uncle, who had, you think, he disappeared. And then it kind of starts to look like he maybe was abducted by aliens, and you need to start exploring this. And this was such a cool game that anyone who's ever played it, I think, remembers it. To me, I hold it on such a high standard that I call it the very best Nintendo game of all time. I still pop it in and play it constantly. It took me about 20 years, but I beat it in 2007. So a game that I adore, and I know it sounds like you never played either of my top 2 games. I encourage you to go out and find them if you can, Steve.
Yeah.
And if you haven't out there watching, please go ahead and try those games. But I think it's time to wrap things up in here. Next time, you want to focus on Sega Genesis?
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll talk about our 3 favorite games from the Sega Genesis in next week's episode of the 16-Bit Superstars. So for myself, the Rob, and for Steve...
Thanks, guys.